Oakville. She said, that's fine. She said, I just came from Redford. Then we went to the next, by Lunenburg, and I came in the shop there, and the guy asked the same kind of questions, you know, where are you from? Toronto. Close to Toronto. How close? He said, well, Oakville. He moved from here to Lunenburg.
This is an interview with Helena Bromet, B-R-O-M-E-T. Helena goes by the name of Lenny. Her maiden name was Mossel, M-O-S-S-E-L. Lenny was born on January 15, 1928 in Amsterdam. Today's date is March 1st, 1995. This is in Oakville on the outskirts of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and my name is Dave Harris. Lenny, please tell me your story from the beginning of your life in Amsterdam.
I was born on January 15, 1928 in Amsterdam. My father's name was Salomon Mossel, M-O-S-S-E-L. My mother's name was Jansje, typical Dutch, Mossel van Bingen, V-A-N-B-I-N-G-E-N. For the first 5 years I lived in Amsterdam till 1933. My father was a diamond cutter and as such employed. Not too much. I was at kindergarten, the Jewish kindergarten in Amsterdam. There are not too many memories. It was an uneventful life, the usual childhood occurrences. When I was 5 years old, it was then in 1933, as the depression was on, there was not much business in the diamond factory, the diamond where my father worked, so he moved to a place of Zandvoort, near, as it's still a seaside resort, Z-A-N-D-V-O-O-R-T, where I spent the next 5 years of my childhood, from 1933 till 1938. What I can recollect is there was this the happiest time of my childhood. We lived there, was at school, naturally public school. I had Hebrew lessons. It was a happy childhood. We were not well off, but we were okay, and there was no problems in that respect. We made our trips to Amsterdam to visit my grandparents, which were the parents of my father. My mother's parents died before I was born, and so as that's the usual childhood. I was a fan of at that time of Shirley Temple. I looked at every movie from her. As I said, it was a marvelous time and the best time of my life. In 1938 we moved back to Amsterdam in a new complex of houses which were very modern for that time. It was originated by a kind of a cooperative. It was a very, very nice, what you call here a flat. We lived on the first floor. My father we moved back to Amsterdam, but my father still, apparently, as far as I can recall, with 10 years old, he didn't have too much work. He was at that time then unemployed, and we were on unemployment insurance, with much to the dismay of my mother and father, naturally, who were not used to that and hated every moment of it. I was at school, in public school. I went to the public school. The public school I had to go there was situated in a very, very, very well-to-do area. And I was still a very provincial girl after 5 years in Zandvoort. naive and trusting, I happened to be in a class where a teacher was who, for some reason or other, didn't like me. I could, as is hindsight now, not sure, but he didn't like me. Everything he tried to not degrade me, to humiliate me in front of the class, which still I am sorry to say has left a lasting impression, and even sometimes to this day I feel sometimes those effects. He was not good for me. I had several accidents in at school. I fractured my arm. He had to, his favorite kids had to walk me to my house, which was quite a distance, which shouldn't have been done. Another incident that a boy was stepping on my finger and broke my nail, totally crushed it. He just ignored it, and I had to wait till it was recess or when we went home to let it look after. Otherwise, I learned and I completed that public school, and I didn't mind that much except from him, but it was normal. Then in 1940, I was 12 years old. I graduated from public school and I entered entered the public high school, where I did fairly well, and that was already in 1940. During the time in May 1940, there was the invasion of the Germans in Holland. Naturally, we knew about that because we read the papers that in September 39 we followed that. Germany invaded Poland, and then it came closer and closer. Then one night, just the night before, my parents were discussing maybe we should move to America. It was just the night before, on the 9th of May. During the night we woke up with a terrific noise, and all the airplanes coming over, and all the people, our bedroom was close to a veranda. We were standing outside at 3 o'clock during the night, and we are looking at the sky, and the sky was black from all the German planes invading Holland. So there lots of excitement, and at that time nobody yet felt anything. The Germans were pretty clever to wait with all actions what they were planning to do. Life afterwards, I went to school, and life resembled, returned to, not say normal, but to almost normal. Then slowly but surely, I don't know exactly the events when or what, but then came that we were not allowed to slowly to visit public transit, swimming pools, go to movie theaters. We were restricted to buy our groceries in stores. We were issued with a yellow David star. The Dutch population reacted very favorable. In that time, they were spontaneously, at that time when we had to wear our stars, the whole population of the Dutch population wore the star at solidarity with us. Naturally, it was short-lived, but it was a good sign that they were commiserating with us. They couldn't do that too long. So then there was also that all the public schools, high school and public schools, were closed for the Jews. We had to go to a separate Jewish high school.
Lanny, as the Germans were forcing German Jews out of Germany.
Right, in 1938. Before that in Kristallnacht. we had lots of German Jewish families coming into Holland to fleeing. And we had my parents took one couple and their little son in our house for a couple of days, a short while, just to help them out. That's all I know. They went on their way. Where and when, I do not recall, but I know they were with us for a short while to help out. Then we had to go to the Jewish high school, which was quite a distance from our home. I had to walk all the way in the morning, quite a distance. I don't know how many miles or kilometers, don't know. But I was at a school, and that was also, despite the circumstances that I was forced into the school, I felt very, very good being in that Jewish school with all the people, because also you could speak freely about what happened, and in the public high school before, you were always restricted, couldn't say what you wanted about the circumstances, what happened around you.
Who was at the high school? Were all the Jewish children in Amsterdam, or was it?
No, there were high schools called MULO, HBS. One was the lower, and the HBS was the little, a different one where you learned different subjects and was a little bit higher in education. But all the Jewish children who were in high school were in the same kind of high school, but only together with Jews. They couldn't be mixed together with the non-Jewish kids.
What type of subjects were you learning there?
We are naturally religion, and for the rest, everything else what was in the public school. We had very competent teachers. One teacher for religion was, his name was Jacob Soetendorp, Soetendorp. His son is presently a rabbi in the shul, in a synagogue in Amsterdam. He was our religious teacher, and that's what I remember.
Now, you mentioned that you were freer to talk. Freer to talk,
right.
What?
Freer to talk about how you thought about the Germans and what happened, and that people unfortunately were taken away, were rounded up out of the houses. That was the sad part, but it was freer. That's what I found, and much more relaxed. You are between yourselves with Jews.
What was the reaction to amongst the students and the teachers to what was occurring at the time?
I don't think that we talked too much about it, because it was too frightful, because you see every time and every morning when you came back to school, there were also one or more students who didn't come back to school, and then we knew that they were being deported and taken out of their houses the night before. So every night when we left, we say, maybe, hopefully, we see you tomorrow. And that was naturally depressing, because it became less and less students in the class.
What kind of social life was?
The social life, despite everything else, I had a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and she had a boyfriend, and there was a theater in Amsterdam. Shall I mention the name? Hollandse Schouwburg called. That means theater, or yes. And there were, at that time, they were playing musicals like the Gypsy Princess, Zigeunerbauern, Gypsy Princess. I don't know at the moment. And all kind of German musicals from Kurt, not from Kurt Weill, but all those, but you're still playing now. And they were performing, all those German musicians, and because they were fled Germany too, and we were attending in the theater, and we had a good time. That unfortunately, that theater later on was used for a holding room for people to be deported to the other camps. We didn't know that then. But at that time we had a good time, and then one day my boyfriend came and told me I have to go. I got my my notice. I have to report for work in Germany under this guise, they said. So we said goodbye, and we thought, well, you have to work. He's young, he'll be returning.
Did you say on disguise?
Oh, no, yeah, this is disguise, that's what they said, you have to go to Germany to work. Well, all the time they knew that wasn't camp, but concentration camps they were deported to. But that was the impression we had received in Holland, that people had to work. Like lots of people, lots of few engaged couples, they married in a hurry, so that the wife with the husband, or husband remained with the wife, is that if we have to work in Eastern Europe, we might as well stay together and be married. You see? That's why they got a lot of people.
No.
And that's what we thought too, that he went. So he left, and his boyfriend left too. Then another portion about the school, my father. My grandmother, my father's mother, at that time was ill, and we had borrowed some supplies from, what is that, the Green Cross or whatever your supplies you could borrow. At that time we didn't need it anymore, because I think she had to be admitted to the hospital. So my father and I, we had a walk on a Sunday to the Jewish quarter there, and we returned to the supplies. Before, and in Amsterdam is known for the drawbridges. And just before we came to the drawbridge, we were warned, somebody warned us, there is a roundup. The Germans are rounding up people, and better hurry and run. So my father pushed me over the bridge. We were on the other side of the bridge. The bridge was drawn up, and now the people on the other side were caught like rats, rounded up and deported to the camps. That was a favorite pastime of the Germans, to round up the people. There was a Jewish quarter, it was a ghetto in Amsterdam, but the ghetto was not, I think, like it is in Warsaw. You could freely go in and out, but it just designed that for the people there in that neighborhood. There was nobody else. All non-Jewish people had to leave there. That's as far as I know.
So the living arrangements remained as is?
Remained as is, the same, but only there were no that in case the Germans wanted to have a roundup, they had every rat in the fall, you know, we were caught. And they mostly did it on a Friday night, naturally.
How did they know which houses held Jewish people?
We are all registered, right? There was two men, Asher and Cohen, who were, they led the community. They didn't lead the community, but the Germans appointed them, or they asked for the job. People know that. That's as far as I know. And they had to, we had to also register. We had to register in order to get our star. And every Jewish people, dutifully, like cattle to slaughter, we were very law-abiding. We went and we registered. So they knew where everybody was. They got a kind of a ID card with a big J on it. I didn't get that then. I only received it when I was 15 years old. So, but everybody, an adult 15 and older, had a J, so they knew exactly where the Jews were. And if the Germans were not totally sure, then some non-Jewish people were all too glad to point out where the Jews were.
Was it very common that non-Jews would wear the star?
No, it was just the one spontaneous reaction when the first time the star was introduced, and we had to wear them. Afterwards, they didn't do that anymore. And I'm sure that they would issue punishment if they would do, because it would confuse them. No, they didn't. Not anymore. Where was I?
At this time, were you developing a religious affiliation of any sort?
Yes, despite everything else, I became I came in contact with a group of Jewish teenagers like myself, and we started to frequent the shul and to have services and have some social get-togethers, which I liked very much. That was in the years 41, 42. In 1941, my grandmother died on February 1941. It was on that day that there was a huge roundup from all Jewish men in the Jewish ghetto. The reason was that there was one Dutch fascist they were provoking. The Dutch fascists were something provoking coming into the Jewish quarters. And he was provoked and he was killed by the Jewish guys. And the Germans helped them and they rounded up a mass of people, of Jewish men on that day in 1941. There is still statues and everything was on strike, the whole system, spontaneously, the Dutch, the train, and every transportation, everything what was in public was stopped after that as protest for the non-Jewish population to their sympathy. There are statues and all in Amsterdam to that effect. It was in February 1941. It was a massive roundup and it was a horrible situation. I didn't even attend, I think, the funeral of my grandmother. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. She was buried in Holland, in the place there, but in the cemetery, but I didn't attend.
Was she ill?
Yes, she was ill. She was in the hospital, and I'm not exactly sure what the illness was.
How did your mother react to the invasion of the Germans?
My mother didn't know. My mother was very upset, and naturally, like everybody else. Not on top of that, there were roundups almost every night around in our neighborhood. That means the Germans were coming to the houses, designated before who was to be rounded up. So that was in our neighborhood, and the people yelled and screamed and cried. And my mother had to sit in the window, in front of the window, and watch during the night. No matter what we asked her to come or go to bed, she didn't listen. Then she had her sister living in Amsterdam. By the way, her sister and her husband were moving back in Amsterdam in 1938. My mother didn't have too much connection with her sister. There was something between sisters, I don't know. They had an argument. Then her sister with husband, who was non-Jewish, moved back to Amsterdam. But he developed stomach cancer, that I remember. He was very, very ill. We visited him. And they lived in a dingy flat at that time. One thing I remember, he must have been a hunter. When I entered that room there, it was in the niche here, was a big bear. They must have shot. And I'm telling you, first time when I saw that bear, I didn't know. That was vividly, I remember. Then I came into a bedroom and I saw he was terribly ill. He died, and my sister my aunt went for a short while with us, but then she got a job as a housekeeper somewhere in Amsterdam. I probably keeping in contact, although we didn't have a phone. No phones were at that time, very rare. There were phones, but we didn't have one. Then in August 1942, there was somebody who and how notified my mother that her sister was being deported and being held in the Gestapo headquarters in Amsterdam. my mother was beside herself, and she ran to the corner of our street where we had our physician to try to get a certificate that my aunt was too ill to be deported, or that she had. That was frequently done, with some success, with not success. That when they get that certificate, the Germans, they release the people. In our case, it didn't help, and my mother was actually never conscious when she came back. The doctor's office returned my mother on a stretcher to our home. She was put to bed, and we called the doctor again, and the doctor told us, sorry, Mr. Mossel, we cannot admit your wife because she's Jewish and we don't want the Jews there in the hospital.
Do you know what was wrong with her?
But I guess and see now she had a severe stroke.
She was in good health
Coma.
days before?
Oh yes, she was in a coma and still was on the bed thrashing around, and then come quiet. All the bodily functions just went without her knowing. She was in a coma from that Friday morning till the Monday night, August the 31st, 1942, when she died. And in the meantime, when my grandmother died, my grandfather came to live with us. So here we the three of us left alone. Devastated, I didn't go to the funeral, I just accompanied the coffin to the end of the street. Across the street lived a fascist family. They never had any decent meals during the whole time when time was normal. He was a shoemaker. Couldn't make any, how do you say it in Dutch, earn any dry bread. Eat never. Very poor. In the beginning, sometimes I played with her, not during the war, not because they showed very definitely that they didn't like us. They lived right across from us. And they were laughing when I passed with the coffin of my mother and the whole funeral procession. They laughed about that.
What was your father, I'm sorry, what was your father doing to earn money?
My father, yes, at that time there was not much that in the diamond industry anyway, and like everybody else, I assumed, and I know he did, the people had to make a living. There was no, I don't think there was no unemployment insurance, there was nothing at that time there, so they made their living in the black market. And a lot of people did that, so we existed, the three of us, afterwards. We had a very, very friendly neighbor. The woman married, he was a Jewish man, she was not Jewish, but she helped us. She cooked our meals. From the day that my mother died, she helped us. Till we were deported to the camp, she cooked our meals for us.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the Jewish high school? For instance, where was it located?
It was located in not the central, almost the centrum of Amsterdam. And there was a theater across from us that showed sometimes a very long time Youth Sus. This was a very, very naturally anti-Semitic movie what was playing, and every time they came out of the school, that face, the typical characteristics what they used to, was on the billboard outside.
What was this movie about?
We were not allowed to go to the movie. I didn't know, but I mean, it was not much good. I'm sure of that.
And who?
Oh yeah, and I also, I had my lunch, because it was too far back to walk to home. I had my lunch with relatives of mine. But at that time, I didn't know they were relatives. I found that out later. But that was family of my relatives of my grandmother. I found that out just years ago in Amsterdam, going to the register, that was family. I have never been well informed about our family, but then they was very, I enjoyed it there, and walking there, and I had a good time. They always gave me a good time. but I also during the war I had one dream, a recurring dream. The dream only stopped when I was deported. It was a dream, there is a big bridge, the River Amstel in Amsterdam, and it occurs when I'm in the middle, lots of people, when I'm in the middle of the bridge opens and I fall in the water. But before touching the water, I wake up. And this was a recurring dream quite often before I was deported. Afterwards, when I was in the camp, I had no such dream. And this means that the dream was very vivid. I still remember that's exactly what happened. I mentioned the first time that my father saved my life. That was when he pulled me over the drawbridge. The second time was when there was a market, and like you have the markets here with groceries, but it was only to be frequented by Jews. So at that time we had to buy some groceries, and I was hungry. My father said, okay, I go with you. We went on a market, we did some shopping, and then all of a sudden we heard the motorcycles and cars coming, and we knew there was another roundup, because the market was full of Jewish people who bought their groceries, and it was the exact spot for, again, mice or rat in a fault caught in a trap. My father pulled me out, we went just by the exit, and when we rounded the corner, the Germans on the motorcycle rounded the corner. So my father turned us around so that they looked at our backs and couldn't see our stars, which we were wearing. Then they entered the market, and as fast as we could, we walked over to one of the houses where we were lucky enough to know to have some friends there. There, from the window of those friends' house or flat, we watched the horror, how they were beating and taking the people into trucks and rounding the whole market up. And actually we were shaken. It took us quite a while for everything was safe so we could leave for home. But in the meantime my mother was home, and everybody heard about the roundup, and she was semi-conscious when we came home, because at that time, as I said, we had no phone and there was nothing to tell that we were safe. When we came home she was beside herself, and it took quite time for her to come back to get her composure. That was the second time that my father saved my life. Then also in 1941 or 1942, my mother was still alive. There was a night of bombing, English coming over, and I don't know if it was accidentally or what, there was a bomb falling on our neighbors, a couple of houses distance from us. And in that house, much naturally families, but there was a family Bromet. And I played with the guy and his brother, and his name was Harry Bromet, and he was born on the same day, the same year as my husband, who is also Harry Bromet, which is a very coincidence. That boy was killed at that night. But it's one of the freak things from life that later on I happened to marry Harry Bromet. If it's the same thing, he will tell the story. So that was the night of the bomb. It was a horror night. We were standing in the hall, and we were, don't know if it would hit us. Then I know we were outside on the street, and I remember I pulled my mother down. There was grass on, when a flower flat on the grass, because we heard the anti-aircraft, and it was a night of horror. And so we during the middle of the night, we had friends living a little bit distance from us, and we walked over there, and we spent the rest of the night there, and the next morning we returned home. That was that night. Then that was what I want to tell, the second time that my father saved my life, and that was the incidence of fate that I had to, that Harry Bromet was killed. The playmate. Life went on till 1942, 1942 in August. As I said, that my mother died at that time, and we lived in the house. My father at that time had a kind of an ID from the Germans that he was needed for the war effort in his diamond, whatever he did. So we were saved for further roundups or deportation. And we know that was a very temporary thing, but because whatever the whim of the Germans was, if they wanted to revoke it, they did. And on one fateful night, in February 1943, they came to our flat and took us out of our house. My father and I, my grandfather was sleeping in a little room just beside the living room. We thought we will not tell the ones who picked us up that there was another one living. But at the last moment, if you're ready to go downstairs, they discovered that my grandfather was still sleeping, so they had to hurry the poor guy out of his bed and hurry, dressing, and they were very, very angry at us that we tried to hide somebody to stay in the house. We were led to a shelter somewhere in Amsterdam, in the south, close to us, and it was an air raid shelter. There they held us till there was transportation, and we were transported to that theater in Amsterdam, in the center of Amsterdam.
How many people were held with you?
The whole theater was always full.
Were they all Jewish?
Yes. I mean, I assume yes.
All from Amsterdam?
Yeah, because in the middle of Amsterdam, yes. It was an horror things. There are now monuments, and part of the front and the back of the theater remains still. I've been there, and all the names from people who moved in there and were there is all memorized in the theater now. They kept the front and the back.
How long were you in the theater for?
During the night.
And
then during the night, my grandfather, father, and I, and then we were outside. We had to go outside, and like cattle, and there was a streetcar waiting, and the streetcar brought us in the middle of the night to the train station. And the train station, they brought us to the camp. It was called at that time a labor camp, Vught, V-U-G-H-T. It was in February 43. In Vught, there was first prisoners of war were kept there, and there were still a few there present. The one horrifying thing I remembered is standing in front of the window there in one of the barracks, and seeing one shot and the body being carried away in a wheelbarrow, just in front there. That was one still from the prisoners of war. Then there was, my father went to the barracks of the men. My grandfather was sick and came in the sick barrack. My grandfather didn't stay too long. He was too sick. He was deported with other sick people to Westerbork, the camp in the northern part of Holland. And I heard later on he died there and was cremated there. There was a crematorium in Westerbork. Not to be used, but it didn't work, no.
What was your first days in Vught like?